Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to Hot Mike. I'm your co-host, Bill Whittle. Hot Mike can't be here today, unfortunately. Despite telling me in person that he really nailed the audition, he didn't even get so much as a callback for the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers reboot. And I'm quoting from his email here. I have decided to go goth. My soul is a bottomless pit of emptiness and despair. He goes on to say that life is nothing more than a sexually transmitted fatal disease whose constant agonies and bitter disappointments makes one gaze at a pebble in a stream with undisguised envy. And then there's some more in that same kind of vein. And then there's a somewhat mystifying announcement that he just ordered a 6-pack of Bear Bodkins from a Renaissance Fair cosplay dealer on Etsy. We expect him back probably by Wednesday. I watched the Joe Rogan Experience with Donald Trump as close to live as it could be within 20 minutes after the episode was released. As I record this, it looks like it's going to get about 30 million views in its first 24 hours. It was a remarkable insight into who Donald Trump really is. And I want to go over some of the things that he talked about on that show, because what I realized about watching Donald Trump talk for 3 hours is that I'd forgotten about what an excellent president he was. It's been so tempting, especially over the last 4 years, to look at him as a stop to the big state. He's almost like a slug that you put into the machine to stop it from consuming more freedom. Like Donald Trump's going to stop this, he's going to stop that, and I believe he will if he's reelected. But it's easy to forget just what an astonishingly good president he was. But much more importantly, I think, is what I got out of this 3-hour sit down with Donald Trump, is how much of a better president he's going to be if he's reelected on November 5th. You know, I was reminded of this after I gave it a little thought. When I learned to fly in gliders, and I had the same experience to a lesser degree when I got my power rating, but when I learned to fly in gliders, it was a 90-minute trip to go out and get an hour-long flying lesson. And what I realized about that was that I learned how to fly on the drive home. That's where I learned how to fly. In the airplane, I was so busy processing experiences as they were coming. I was just so busy just experience things. We're going to do a rope break at 300 feet or 400 feet, and I'm going to make the turn back to. But the muscle memory and the actual learning didn't happen until I got in the car and I had that 90-minute drive home and I had a chance to go over everything that I'd just been through. And I had this thought that the same thing is almost certainly true of Donald Trump. I mean, I think his first term was a tremendous success as a president. But I think that what I got out of listening to him on Joe Rogan for 3 hours is that his second term will be astonishing because he's had 4 bitter years to reflect upon the lessons that he's learned and look back on the mistakes that he made. Many of those were of his own choosing, but as he pointed out, I think very effectively on Rogan, no one is prepared for this job. He had never been in politics before. The only political position he'd ever had was president of the United States. I'm going to talk about that on the next Hot Mic. But for him to have 4 years to think about what he did wrong and what Washington really is, and to see the reaction and to go through the bitterness of the 2020 debacle and all the rest of it, I think he's a much more aware man than he used to be. It may turn out, when it's all said and done and deep history is written, that we were actually lucky that 2020 went the way it did, because there's no time for reflection between a president's first term and their second term. That's why a president's second term is usually just a pale shadow of what they did in their first term, and usually what they did in the first 2 years, maybe even the first 100 days, you could argue. When you simply segue from term 1 to term 2 without so much as a break for your inauguration speech, I don't think you get that reflection. We're going to find out, I suppose. I got a good feeling about this election. Before I talk about the things that he said, because I want to go over them in a little bit of detail, just to give you a brief rundown of what a remarkable mind for the presidency this Donald Trump has. I want to read you some comments that came in essentially live. The show was pre-recorded, obviously, and it was released. And I was watching it within about 20 minutes of its release. I sat down and watched the whole 3 hours. And I want to read you comments that really struck me, because these comments were coming in as close to real time as they possibly can. It goes to show you the effect not only that America has on the world, really, but the effect that Donald Trump has on the world in terms of a restoration to normalcy, to some sort of sense of sanity, not just here in America, but all around the planet. So let me just read you a couple of comments that kind of shook me because these were top-rated comments as it came in. 7 a.m. in the Netherlands, and I'm watching a great interview. Having the president on a podcast for 3 hours is insane. Absolutely awesome. 1:45 a.m. in Georgia, USA. Crazy how many people are watching together. Watching from Hungary, Budapest. Watching from Argentina. Viva la Libertad, carajo. Watching from Cape Town, South Africa. 7 a.m. in France. Started watching as soon as I got up. Watching from Scotland. God bless him. It's 11 p.m. in California. Tuning in. Going to be up late tonight. Slovenia here. Love and peace to all. Merci from France, peace to you all. Watched in Australia, good luck America. From Tanzania, we're loving this. Watching from Spain, praying for peace, thank you Joe Rogan. Watching from Saskatchewan, Canada, awesome interview Joe and wishing you much success President Trump. Watching from Gothenburg, Sweden. Watching from Germany, the world needs peace, God bless all people. Tuning in from London, England, huge fan of this. Sending my love to American friends and patriots, good luck Trump. Much love from Norway. Watching from the Yukon. It's 1 a.m. in Miami right now. Watching from the Philippines. Go Sir Trump. Watching from Morocco. Good luck, America. Wouldn't miss it. Watching from Scotland. Tuning in from Venice, California. Watching from Estonia. Watching this from Gdansk, Poland. Watching from Canada. It's so cool to see how many people around the world are watching this. One of the comments is, this is history right here, folks. I agree. Watching from Estonia. Iraqi woman watching from Baghdad. San Francisco resident here, and I'm 100% voting for Donald Trump. Early morning in Germany, and I'm in. Much love and peace to the world. It's 6 a.m. in South Africa. I just woke up, made coffee, and now I'm watching this. Been waiting since Thursday, and this one really puts it in focus. This is from NP Fouts 1983 in the Joe Rogan podcast an hour after the show aired. The love between all of us around the world is amazing. The internet can be a horrible place, but it also gives us the opportunity to see how much we are alike around the planet. I was so completely blown away by the international quality of these. Were top comments. I wasn't going through hundreds and hundreds of comments to filter these out. This is as they were coming in. The entire world sat down and watched this because they wanted to see an unfiltered Donald Trump. They had either a good feeling about him or at least enough of an open mind to watch the program. And what ended up happening was this outpouring of not only interest, but of love from around the world. And I found that to be very surprising and tremendously moving and tremendously hopeful because this is a global phenomenon. It's not so much that the American election is a global phenomenon, although every American election affects the world in ways that we Americans can barely appreciate. But it is about something bigger than that. It's about what I'm going to talk about on the next hot mic. It's about the outside versus the inside. And it was an amazing thing to see that kind of response from around the world. Okay, let's get down to the things that he actually talked about. I just basically skipped through the interview just before recording this and took a series of notes on some of the topics he covered. This wasn't everything he talked about, but these are the ones I thought were worth mentioning. When he was talking about the situation in Palestine, real early on, he said that these attacks on October 7th of 2023 wouldn't have happened if he was president because he had deprived Iran of money. Hamas was bankrupt, and Hezbollah and Iran and their nuclear program was on the rocks and all the rest of it. Barack Obama had famously sent pallets of cash to Iran, and the Biden administration got cozy with Iran. And Trump simply said, when I was president, there was no power for Hamas to launch this kind of invasion because I made sure they didn't have the money that was going to them through Iran. Amazing how some simple calculation like that actually has an effect. And with regard to the Ukraine war, which I'll come back to in a minute, both of those, he simply said Vladimir Putin would not have gone into Ukraine if he'd been president. He said he'd had some words with Vladimir. He said he'd get along well with Vladimir. No doubt the mainstream media will talk about this as him being having kind words for his master. But basically, it's been anecdotally reported in two or three different locations that when Donald Trump was president, he was at a state dinner with Vladimir Putin and essentially bites of his salad. Vladimir, by the way, no matter what you think, don't go into Ukraine. Don't do it. Because if you go into Ukraine, I want to hit Moscow. Now, people hear that and they lose their minds, especially liberals and progressives who don't understand how the world works and don't understand what strength and deterrence really mean. But when Donald Trump said something like that, especially in such an informal sense, that's the only way it works. If he had sent an actual letter or a formal declaration, a diplomatic declaration saying if then Putin would have had no choice but to dig in his heels and say, well, then, double dare you. But to mention it casually over dinner, like between bites of a salad. Well, if you decide to invade Ukraine, it's a big mistake because if you do that, I'm going to hit Moscow. He's not going to hit him in Ukraine. He's going to hit Moscow. What does Vladimir Putin go home from that encounter? That's a real encounter that actually happened. What does Putin go home with when he hears something like that? Now, you may say he may go home with this guy's absolutely crazy, and maybe that's it. And smart as crazy like a fox. This is precisely what Donald Trump is trying to instill in Vladimir Putin when he makes a remark that astonishing and in such a casual way. What he's doing is he is complicating Putin's targeting solution. He is throwing not only a variable, the variable. Is the United States going to do anything other than write us a strongly worded letter? He's basically saying to Vladimir Putin, your calculations on Ukraine, whichever calculations you may make that make you think is worthwhile, you may want to think again, because if you do that, I'm going to start sending cruise missiles into Moscow. Now, you can say Putin could ignore that and just simply say, well, surely he's bluffing. But maybe he's not. This is the genius of people who understand how power relationships work. This is how power relationships work. This is why we haven't had a major war, civilizational level war, for 80 years, because nuclear weapons complicate the targeting solution for victory. They simply say there is no path to a victory over our civilizational enemy, China versus the United States, or Russia versus the United States, Russia versus China, whoever it happens to be at any given moment. In the past, you would take a risk on it, because if you failed, well, then you lost a bunch of the proles and nobody's going to miss them anyway. You had a population excess. But now with nuclear weapons, it's like you decide to launch an attack, a first strike against the Soviet Union or Russia or China or whatever the case may be. There is no good outcome here. There is no victory from that. See what I'm saying? He's throwing a wrench into Vladimir Putin's Ukraine invasion, in the same way that Vladimir Putin invaded Georgia when it was clear Barack Obama was going to win the election in 2008. And he did it again in 2014, but didn't do jack between 2016 and 2020. Trump pointed out that the debacle of the withdrawal from Afghanistan showed Vladimir Putin that the United States was leaderless and incompetent. And that's not the kind of posture you want the world's superpower to project if you have some tricky business up your sleeve. He said something that was a profound insight. I've never heard this anywhere. He was talking about what Ukraine means to Russia. And he said, Ukraine is the apple of Putin's eye. Now, that may not sound like a big deal to you, but it is a big deal. He said the same thing about China. He said Taiwan is the apple of their eye. That's what they want. Their entire national consciousness is focused on acquiring these two independent countries. Now, the solution to these problems are complex. And he was asked about what he would do. And he said, well, I can't really go into what I would do, because if I tell you what I would do, it would spoil the deal. But just knowing that Ukraine is the apple of Putin's eye means that Donald Trump, unique among leaders in the world, and certainly unique among American leadership, understands the value. And if you understand the value of what Ukraine means to Vladimir Putin, you can begin to structure a deal that gives him something comparable. It's not giving him the apple of his eye. He's not going to get the apple of his eye, and neither is China. They're not going to have Taiwan, and he's not going to have Ukraine. But unless you understand how important it is to them, how can you possibly put together a deal that prevents them from getting that, but gives them something that they can find acceptable in return? How else can you possibly do that? He also talked about his relationship with North Korea. It did not start off well. North Korea had nothing but contempt for the United States. They refused to talk to the Obama administration. They went on their own way with nuclear power. Donald Trump basically calls Kim Jong-un little rocket man. Kim Jong-un says, I've got a red button on my table. Don't push your luck, meaning a nuclear button, obviously. And Trump replies with, well, I got a bigger one and mine works. See, that kind of talk gets the attention of people who are dictators. It gets their attention. Trump eventually goes to Korea. They have a jovial conversation. They seem to be BFFs afterwards. Trump asks Kim Jong-un, this is what Trump said in a 3-hour conversation. He said, I asked him, what do you do when you're not building nuclear weapons? Well, what do you mean? He said, well, you personally, not your country, what do you do when you're not pursuing this nuclear power plant? Do you go to the beach? Do you relax? Do you go skiing? What do you do? And Kim Jong-un essentially said, I have no choice. I have to build nuclear weapons because if I don't provide this kind of strength, my country's going to collapse from within. Trump says, well, there may be a way around that. Kim Jong-un says, well, let's talk. Next thing you know, 2020 happens, and we're back again with them doing what they're doing because the American leadership has no conception of what drives the individuals that are running dictatorships. But Donald Trump understands what the apple of Kim Jong-un's eye is. He understands what the apple of China's eye is. He understands what the apple of Russia's eye is. He understands the situation. And as president of the United States, we've got a guy who is not going at this diplomatically. He's going at it as a deal maker. What do you want? What are you willing to give up? Will you take this for that? You won't? Well, that's the best deal you're going to get. That's it. That this is as good as it's going to get for you. It's a good deal. You should take it. That kind of diplomacy produces a safe and prosperous world. In fact, if you give a guy like that enough time, you've not only eliminated Russia and China and North Korea as threats to the United States, you have an actual possibility to bring them as partners, to bring them into the family of nations. Think about that, a world where you're no longer dealing with China as China, you're dealing with China as Japan. Japan is a trade rival, but Japan is not our enemy. Japan is our friend. One of the most important things that I got out of this was listening to a man talk about the economy who knows economics. Not just the terms of economics, but how real world economics actually works. One of the things that Trump said on the Joe Rogan show was that he said he talked to a number of leaders of big businesses and smaller businesses as well, but some of the giant companies. And he said, if you had a choice between lower taxes or fewer regulations, which ones would you take? And universally, they say fewer regulations. If you tell a businessman or a corporation or anybody, if you tell them there's going to be a 12% tax increase, that's real bad for companies that are on a 2 or 3% margin to stay alive, but at least they can plan for that. Regulations, on the other hand, can drop out of the sky. A regulation can be written that can put you out of business like that. A regulation that says that you've got to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour puts many businesses out of business with a stroke of a pen, and it's not even done by legislators. Hearing a president say, I'm going to cut regulations as well as lower taxes, is a guy who's got the magic key to the kingdom. That's why his economy was the best economy that we'd ever seen in the United States prior to COVID coming in. And he was pretty clear about where COVID came from, too. Came from the Wuhan virology lab. But prior to that, the economy was humming. Trump said he had a pollster tell him just prior to COVID outbreak in the U.S., he said if George Washington were to be reincarnated and run for president and had Abraham Lincoln as his running mate, he still wouldn't beat you. This is what pollsters said about Trump's popularity prior to the conveniently timed outbreak of the pandemic in late 2019, early 2020. Trump is also naturally inclined to look for business solutions to problems that the government thinks they can help. And one of the examples he pointed out was this, we've got to get internet to rural areas initiative. $4,000 million, $4 billion, I think was the number allocated to getting internet to people in remote areas. And the number of houses that they've hooked up so far is 0. Where did that money go? Where do you think it went? $4 billion of government money, your money and my money, taxpayer money being spent to run cables, which require ditches, infrastructure, switching stations, all this other stuff to run a cable from a internet hub out to a farm someplace. When Trump simply said, why don't we just get them Starlinks? Problem solved. Problem solved. See, this is not just Trump. This is what the Trump-Musk alliance means. It's not a question of Elon Musk personally making that suggestion. It's the fact that in Elon Musk, he has an advisor and apparently is turning into a friend who has the best vision of what the future can be of any human being on the earth. The fact that Elon Musk is on Team Trump wearing a black MAGA hat is a sign that the second term of Donald Trump will be a 21st century government, maybe for the first time in the 21st century. We're a quarter of the way through it. You'd think we'd catch up by now. And if you've got Elon Musk whispering in your ear, there's a way to do this without the government spending all of this money on something that's outdated and won't work anyway, and makes an end run around all the corruption and all of the outright theft that goes on. I'm in, man. Color me in. Trump then went into something almost like a masterclass on an issue that's not a federal government issue, but it certainly affects me. It affects all Americans, affects the world, in fact. And that's the issue of water in California. He basically said, I didn't know this, but he basically said that it's not a problem getting water to California, that water that's coming down from the north naturally is being diverted into the Pacific Ocean in order to protect this fish, which I suspect is probably the Delta smelt, but don't quote me on that. Some species of fish means that we have this, meaning California, has decided to make the Central Valley of California, which was once a lake, into arid desert land when it was once probably the most productive agricultural land in the country. And this is being done politically by elites who don't have to worry about what the price of arugula is. They're going to get their imported peaches, and they're going to sit around eating their, as Bill Burr said, some pretentious fruit like pears or pomegranates or something like that. It's not going to affect Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom wants farmers out of California because farmers vote Republican. That's why he's drying up the Central Valley of California. But Trump's analysis of where the water comes from, where it goes, and how self-inflicted this is, and how simple it would be to simply stop it and just say, "Hey, this little fish is not going to cripple the economy of the largest state in the union, unless we determine to do it on purpose," which is exactly what Gavin Newsom and the progressives in California are doing. California's beatings are going to have to continue until morale improves. No question about that. We're going to find out about the country in about a little over a week by the time this video appears. But it was a remarkable depth of understanding of a complex issue that really isn't that complex at all. Just simply, if this Delta smelt or whatever it is endangered, fantastic. Make a little pond someplace and stock it full of these things, and they can reproduce to their heart content. And if you really want to have lots and lots of these endangered species, with any luck at all, they'll be delicious. You put them on pizza, and then we will have as many reserves of this particular fish as we have of. We're not running out of beef, and we're not running out of pork, I've noticed. Simple solution, because the problem is self-inflicted. I mentioned a second ago how revolutionary and inspiring it would be to have a president who understood economics. He talked about our debt, and he said he was going to start paying it off before COVID hit. Maybe not. There's no way to know whether that actually would have happened. But what Donald Trump has said on a number of occasions is, and he's right about this, is the United States has the largest reserves of energy on the face of the planet. We have, just in Anwar in the Arctic, in Alaska, just in that one district, we've probably got more oil under the ground than Saudi Arabia does. And his point was, we should be selling oil to the world, oil and gas energy, selling energy. We should be an energy exporter, which means that our energy will be dirt cheap. That puts us in much better competitive advantage relative to places where labor is cheap, like China and Vietnam and all the rest of these third world countries that just dump their garbage into the ocean. You know, you make a widget, you have to pay the cost of labor, which is high in America. But you also have to pay the cost of energy. And if energy costs are low and really dramatically low, then you can bring manufacturing back to the country. But that wasn't just the argument he was making. He was making the argument that we can sell our essentially endless reserves of energy overseas and use that money to pay down and eventually pay off the debt, and then use the rest of the cheap energy to grow our way out of it. He's the only person I've heard of that talked about paying down $35 trillion as a possibility. I'd always assumed that this was just simply off the table, that it was just a question of time till the inevitable economic collapse came, because every single year, more and more of our tax dollars don't buy us anything. They don't even buy us bad government. They just service the debt. The idea that somebody's talking about paying this down. Let me say one thing about paying down the debt. If you make one debt payment on the national debt, and instead of adding to the debt, you have 1 year where you pay off $1,000 of a $35,000 billion debt, the trajectory changes. You are now working with the bank. You are no longer a guy who's running away from his car payments who has to have his country repossessed. Now you're working with the bank. Well, I can only pay this every month. Good. That's fine. We just want you making regular payments. I understand you're in some financial trouble. Make whatever payment you can. Stay in touch with the bank. Work on eliminating the debt. But the people who are out the money want to see an effort on the part of the people that owe them money, that they're making an effort to pay down the debt. And one significant, forget significant, because there's nothing you can pay that is significant compared to $35 trillion, but even paying down a symbolic $1 billion or symbolic $1 million, just anything, any kind of payment on the debt, shows those of us who have utterly abandoned the issue of economics as being real anymore, that maybe there is such a thing as a plus column and a minus column. Because if there is, in fact, actual real economics left in the world, and there is a plus and minus column, we don't live in the richest country in the world. We live in what is by far the poorest country in the world. If you look at assets and liabilities, we owe $35,000 billion. We're the poorest country in the world. I'd like to change that. Sounds like President Trump would like to change that too, and it sounds like he's got a plan on how to do it. Imagine that, a specific plan. Didn't talk about his childhood when he was asked about this issue. He said, "Yeah, we'll just sell oil and gas, and that's how we'll start to pay down the debt. We'll have other countries pay off our debt." Shocking. He spent a little time talking about nuclear power. Rogan apparently was in favor of it. Good for you, Joe. I'm 100% in favor of it. Just the design of traditional type uranium reactors. When you talk about nuclear power, what are you stuck with? 3 Mile Island, nothing happened at 3 Mile Island. Nobody was hurt at 3 Mile Island. 3 Mile Island had a scare, but that reactor was designed in the 60s. Chernobyl, of course, is the giant catastrophe, but Chernobyl did not have a containment built around it, and Chernobyl reactor was being run at power levels that the engineers were saying will explode the reactor, and the only reason that accident happened was because a petty communist party chief wanted to impress his superiors, so you damn near wiped out the population of Europe because of your ideology. There's no containment around the reactor at Chernobyl. This is like having a fire at your house. We're going to light a fireplace to have a nice quiet evening at home, except instead of having a fireplace, we don't have a fireplace. We're going to light a fire in the middle of the carpet. A fireplace is a containment for fire. Chernobyl didn't have a containment. It's like lighting a fire in your living room and not having any fire extinguishers around either. And then, of course, there was Fukushima, which was designed to survive a 9.0 earthquake, which is once in a, 10,000-year earthquake. Turned out it was 9.1. Turned out that the structure at Fukushima survived the earthquake just fine. What they hadn't counted on was that the backup generators designed to cool the reactor were flooded by the tsunami. They just hadn't counted on that. And I have heard anecdotally, don't hold me to this because I didn't really dig too deep into it, but they probably could have saved the contamination if they had been willing to sacrifice the reactor and flood it. But they tried to save the reactor, so, boom. My point is that not only is he talking about new nuclear reactors, but these are designs that were designed and would be built in the 21st century instead of the middle of the 20th century. And this doesn't even include things like thorium and other forms of reactors. Doesn't include things like small-scale self-contained reactors. And the fact that somebody's talked about nuclear power at all is a sign that the future may not be this progressive vision of us sitting around burning cow pies, picking parasites off each other as we eat our sustainable insects and algae cakes, and talk about raising money for the Guatemalan water snake. This is a future, an actual future that works, where there's enough, where energy is endless. You can air condition outdoors. We have the means of doing this. We've had the means of doing this for 50 years. I've watched my entire life go by, knowing that we could live in this future that we all thought we were going to get, and knowing that every single aspect of shortage and scarcity and injustice and racism is manufactured by the left in order to maintain political power. It's enough to make you sick. And I want to close with the one thing that I thought was the most interesting point, and that was Donald Trump talking about tariffs. He basically said that we can use tariffs to make the country rich, we have other people basically pay our taxes. He floats the idea as a possibility of eliminating the income tax and paying for the government through the use of tariffs. I just wanted to talk about this because, number one, it's an original idea. It's a very original idea. And I just wanted to talk about it briefly in the larger sense. The conservative opinion is fair trade works best for everybody. And I agree with that. And I'm not walking my opinion back on that. But I've never heard Donald Trump talk about tariffs in the sense of we're going to put tariffs on Japanese cars or Korean cars, as an example. I mentioned this earlier. I've never heard him talking about that in order to protect American automakers. I hear him talking about using punitive tariffs against countries that have been taking advantage of us in the same way that he talks about NATO needs to pay its fair share or else we're getting out of NATO. I think NATO is a tremendously important alliance and is the single most impressive piece of American diplomacy. Forget American. I think it's the single most important and impressive piece of diplomacy in the history of the world. But I also think that European countries have been taking advantage of American taxpayers in order to fund their social programs since they don't have to pay for their own defense since we've been paying for them. And Donald Trump comes along and says, if this is a partnership, then it's a partnership. Pay your fair share. I'm behind that 100%. I am taking that position about tariffs. I think trade should be fair as long as the people we're trading with are playing fair. If they're not playing fair, then it's time to simply start hitting back. One of the examples he used, and I'd not heard about this before, this is anecdotally from Donald Trump, but I'm sure he would have been fact-checked on it many times before. But basically, he made a point, and I think this is a critical point. China was going to build an auto factory in Mexico, and it was going to be the largest auto factory in the world by a wide margin. And what would happen there is that the Chinese would use Mexican labor to build cars that would be sold in America, and they don't have to pay the shipping charges anymore because they simply drive them over the border, legally drive them over the border and sell them in America. And you'd have these low-priced, cheap cars that would basically put American car makers out of business because it's being subsidized by China and so on. And Trump said, if they build that plant in Mexico, I'm going to put a 200% tariff on every car they manufacture. I'll make it 1,000% if I have to. I will see to it by ordering tariffs to make sure that these cars never enter the United States because there's not a person on earth who will be able to afford to buy them here in this country. And according to Trump, they pulled the plans for the plant because they suspect that Trump's going to win this election. This is the ultimate reason that I wanted to make this video and talk about what kind of a president this man can be. Because when it's all said and done, it's a president who's looking out for America. It's a president who is American interests at heart and who's not afraid to protect America instead of kowtowing to the Chinese and having a vice presidential nominee who's been there 30 times and all the rest of it, and just loves them. It's not like a California governor who decides to clean up the homeless and the needle and the human feces problem in San Francisco while the so-called president of China visits and then allows it to go back to the living hell it's become after that. He says you clean your house when companies coming over. Yeah. I think on Rogan's show, I think it was Rogan who said, yeah, also it's not a bad idea to maintain a nice house when there's not company coming over. All of this to say, and it's a much longer episode than I thought it would be, but I just wanted to express the power that a pro-American president who understands economics and diplomacy on a level that none of these clowns, none of them understand. Even Ronald Reagan, who was always acting in America's best interest, dealt with the Soviet Union as an adversary and did it diplomatically. Donald Trump doesn't see adversaries in the same way that we normal humans do. He sees potential partners. He sees people he can make a deal with that benefits both parties. That is an astonishing asset to have for a country and for the rest of the world as well. Maybe that's why so many people from around the world were tuning in to see what this man was all about and what he could do. It was a history-making event. I watched it. I was hoping I would save you some time by telling you some of the highlights, but I'm looking at the record time here, and it damn near is third as long as the interview. So watch as much of this as you want to. But in any event, that's what I saw, and I was completely blown away, and I just wanted to put it out there so that that we can remind ourselves that Donald Trump is more than just a valve that shuts off the destruction of the country. He is capable of producing a future for this country, the likes of which we've never seen before. And that future is going to depend on whether you watching this video right now have either already voted or get out and vote early. Don't wait for election day to come along. I used to be 100% in favor of voting on election day, but until we have paper ballots on election day and we have a clean and secure system, why take a chance on waiting and finding out, oh, our voting machines aren't working today, or, ooh, all the machines are voting automatically for the Democrat, or, ooh, like they said in Arizona in the 2022 elections. Well, some of our machines are working at 50% capacity, and the rest of them are out of order. But don't go anywhere else and vote. Just stick around here. We'll get it sorted out for you. Get it in the bank. This is scaring the daylights out of them, and the more scared they get, the more they panic, and the more advanced voting that goes Republican, the more they realize they're going to lose, and that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that would be my final comment on the show today. Get out there and vote early, and get it in the bank, because I think we're going to win this thing, and I'm feeling better about our prospects for America than I have in a long, long time, thanks to spending 3 hours with one of the most remarkable men that has ever walked this earth. No matter what you say about his shortcomings, that guy knows what he's talking about. And all I want at this point is somebody who loves the country and is not incompetent. I don't think that's too much to ask. And I certainly think that we have both of those on one side of the ticket and neither of them on the other. We'll see you next time right here on Hot Mic.